Time to suit up, heroes, and prepare yourselves for the tips, tricks, and interviews that will take your cosplay to the next level. Get ready for the Builders of Cosplay.
All right, everybody, welcome to the show. We have a really good show for you guys today. We have Gary.
Time to suit up, heroes, and prepare yourselves for the tips, tricks, and interviews that will take your cosplay to the next level. Get ready for the Builders of Cosplay.
All right, everyone, welcome to the show. For those of you streaming on Twitch here, we had a little technical difficulty, but you know what? I don't care.
Nobody cares.
I don't care. It's fine.
Hey, we're streaming on Instagram too, Jason. We're live everywhere today.
How are we streaming on Instagram?
I'm streaming on Instagram.
Of course you are. Of course you're the only one doing the thing, right? It's me. I'm doing it.
I'm doing it.
Anyway, welcome to the show. We are the Builders of Cosplay. We've been on a little hiatus last month with con season coming up, or not up, but here upon us. And Anthony being the only really one who knows anything about what we talk about, we couldn't do a show. But
I like to pretend.
Yeah,
I like to pretend that I know.
We do a good job.
That much.
But we're here now, and we're back, and we're going to be talking about molding and casting today. It's something new that Anthony's learning about, and a couple of you guys have written in and asking us to do a show specifically on this topic too. Will you stop paying attention to the camera?
I'm doing both.
For 2 seconds?
I'm doing both.
Okay, I need you to be here with me.
Well, I am.
At the moment.
I'm right here. Right here next to you.
What if I should just be on Instagram with you? Then we can just talk to each other in Instagram.
So we'll have like a meta broadcast where we're streaming together, but also on Instagram. We're everywhere.
I think that'd be great.
We're trying to market the podcast a little bit more out to everybody. I'm trying to get the whole idea for the Builders of Cosplay out into, I think, that just the hands of as many people as we can. So we're trying out as many social venues, expanding out a little bit. Yeah. We're trying, I think.
We're doing a good job. I think we're doing okay. And you know what I've noticed though, that there's kind of a lot of other cosplay podcasts starting to come. I hear rumors.
Yeah. There's a big one.
We're trailblazers, Anthony.
There's a couple of big ones that really popped up. There's a new one. My friend Eric at Core Geek just started up, and he's doing his broadcast.
Okay.
But now we're expanding out to Twitch. We're twitch.tv/the Builders of Cosplay.
That's right. Or it's just Builders of Cosplay.
Builders of Cosplay.
Yeah.
My apologies. So we're expanding out in the venues. I think some of the other people definitely have a lot more prowess when it comes to like doing the stream because they've been doing it for longer versus for us.
Yeah, well, it's mainly me, and I am not what you call technologically savvy. You know what I mean? I need to be told what to do and how to do it and whatever. And I guess I want things to happen right now. I'm very much a millennial that way.
Oh yeah, the same way. Well, yeah,
it's tough for me. It's tough for me to figure it out, and especially with the you want look when you're doing a podcast. You're putting your own money into it for a long time until people donate, and that's how every podcast in the world kind of grows. Either your money or people donate the money, and we do like 3 or 4 podcasts here, so it's the money we have just very spread very thin, right? So it's just it's tough to kind of reach out and do these new things on Twitch, which for the most part I used to broadcast like live stream and then on YouTube. Those work fine. Twitch, for some reason, with the old gear that I have, it's a different animal.
Tough. Yeah,
it's weird, right?
I've been like for the past couple of weeks, I've been picking up Twitch myself, kind of like learning how to work with a little bit between doing some cosplay shows. We've done a couple as far as like painting goes. Some gaming streams just to kind of get like an idea on the audiences, how they work.
Yeah.
And it's difficult, like you actually like because people ask questions. Obviously, people talk to you while you're streaming, which is in itself a difficult entity because you have to talk to the audiences that are out there watching. Versus up to this point for us at the Builders, we have been pre-recording everything, and then we've just been kind of relying on the Facebook posts and blog posts to get people to talk,
which is very old school.
Yeah,
it's very 2014.
Yeah, you got to have the instant thing.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We're going to get some social media help here soon. We have a very lovely listener who reached out to us in Canada. She just finished a bunch of builds too, and so her timing is right, and our timing is right. So we're gonna what we want to do here is really grow a community.
Yeah,
and she's going to help us do that, and because that's kind of what obviously cosplay is really all about. I mean, the great handiwork aside and the great crafts
comes
aside,
down to the people.
It's the people in the community, right?
Exactly.
So we want to be a part of that. We want to help build that and grow that. So social media is obviously going to be an important part of that. So we're going to get some help. We're going to get some love. We're going to push our shows out, and it's going to be a good time.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time.
If you want to support us, you go to builderscosplay.com and follow us. Grab our other shows. I believe they're also on iTunes and every other place that podcasts are located. They are there for your perusal. A couple photos on the blog too as well. I need to give that some love too, but
yeah.
Like I said, I'm doing so much. I'm so spread thin, so I'm really looking forward to getting some help here. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and between all of the big builds coming up for me personally on my page, The Ronin Cosplay, I'm going to be trying to share out some of the builds that go on during the Ronin Cosplays, my major stuff, on our page for the Builders of Cosplay as well. So there'll be a little bit of a crossover for you guys,
cool.
Especially for people wanting to learn props and leatherworking. That's the big concentration, especially now with TwitchCon coming up in October, and that's going to be where all the gears are being shifted to, is prepping for TwitchCon.
Nice.
A lot of work that's going to be going into that. So there's definitely going to be more interactivity from our end, especially now with us streaming and me streaming more for Twitch. We'll definitely have more availability for people to ask questions, talk to us, join us on live streams.
Yeah, I think it'll be cool. But for now, today, let's get into our show, which is an intro into molding and casting.
Molding and casting. So
this is something that you just started.
Yeah,
right?
I've actually never messed with molding and casting before. So this was a very new experience to me. For most of you guys who've listened to our past shows, for me personally, most of my props have come from 3D printing. And I partner with another shop, Cosplastics, and I do all the 3D modeling and I do the refining on some of the props, the ones that I use. He actually does all of the molding and casting over there, so we don't have to reprint out props and refine them every time.
Right.
Right. Because as you guys know, we've talked about this before, 3D printing and refining it takes a lot of time. So we spend the time and we refine and clean up one print and then he molds and casts them. So I was doing this to kind of learn. I kind of had like a little small project idea in mind. And I actually started doing this from sculpting instead of 3D printing. So I went a little old school with the method.
Okay.
I have never sculpted before.
So literally you're talking a lump of clay.
Lump of clay.
And you just carve it.
I took a little styrofoam ball,
Mm-hmm.
and I just started sculpting on top of it.
Okay.
And we'll have some of the photos of the early process of the build up on the blog when we post it. I don't have that obviously here with me because I destroyed it in the process of.
Because you were angry?
No, because I sucked.
Anthony Smash?
Yeah, Anthony Smash.
Okay.
I like to build. I just break everything.
Yeah.
No, I actually ended up kind of destroying it when I did the first mold because I was impatient.
Okay. Let me rewind you real fast. So you had a styrofoam ball.
Styrofoam ball.
And what do you mean you sculpted on top of that?
So
were you carving the styrofoam?
No.
Okay.
So I took clay, and you have to use a non-sulfur-based clay. That's one of the important parts.
Duh. I mean,
I almost didn't know that, and it would have destroyed everything had I used a sulfur-based clay.
is that like a common clay, and you have to find specific? I've never heard of non-sulfur clay, but I don't run in like the clay industry, so okay.
But apparently, a lot of clay has sulfur in it.
Okay.
Or clay is air drying, so you can't use air drying clay because if you're continuing to sculpt, you're working on this thing repetitively for like long periods of time, and you don't want it to dry out.
Right.
Also, you can then reuse the clay once you're done with your initial sculpts. If you finish something out and then you're like, okay, mold cast it, you can take that clay, mush it all back into a ball, and reuse it. As long as you didn't completely destroy it.
Right.
So I had the styrofoam ball, which gave me the concept, and I'll show you guys here. So this is my wonderful little project, and this looks like absolutely nothing right now. I swear it'll make sense in the future. I wanted to build a little fireball so that essentially I could look like in photos and stuff like I was casting a spell. And it'll make sense later, I promise. So you can see kind of in the shape of it right now, there's a ball kind of at like the base, and then I worked off of taking the clay and just kind of like sculpting some of the fire curves. I used a basic tool off Amazon set. It was like a little carrying case of clay sculpting tools. It was like $20.
Okay.
And it had like a ton of tools in it.
Right.
I don't even think it was $20. I think it was like $10.
Okay, even better.
And I just kind of started blocking out shapes. Now, I didn't go too far with this. I'm going to be honest. I suck at sculpting clay.
Right. Clearly.
Right?
No, I'm kidding.
You look at people like Reeves FX, who makes masks, cowls for, like Batman cowls. And he's one of the best people I know who does this. You see some of the sculpting that they do with clay, or Solo Roboto, another great kind of like proper mask person. He does stuff out of clay, and they spend a ton of time refining their initial sculpt. I could have spent more time refining my initial sculpt, but I was like, you know what? I feel like if I keep messing with this, I'm just going to destroy it.
Right. I get that way too, man, with hobbies and crafts especially. You're just like, it's fine. It's maybe 80% there. Yeah. But if I keep doing it, I'm going to have to start over.
Exactly.
And I'd rather live with knowing what it could have been rather than living with having to spend another 80% of that build time doing the same stuff.
Yeah,
which is not fun.
I was also worried about like doing a first sculpt and then trying to make a mold off of that and then just ruining that mold because I had no idea what I was doing.
Right.
So my premise was to create a junk mold. And essentially what a junk mold is for you guys is kind of like the first mold but not the final mold. And again, we'll have pictures of this in the build process for the blog post. It gave me enough of a depiction of the fireball that I wanted to go for.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of refining work to do from there. Whether it came down to sanding or filling gaps. And I'll show you guys this when we get a little close in with the junk mold here in a second. I knew I was like, okay, if when I cast from that mold, I can play with the shapes around there a little bit more and be a little bit more comfortable because I'm used to using the tools when it comes to refining things. In this case, same stuff I use for my 3D printing, which is part A and B epoxy sculpts, which is kind of like a clay, but it dries like really hard, and it's actually like an adhesive as well. And I use that for filling gaps in my 3D prints. And then I also used my 2-in-1 filler primer, which I use for my 3D prints as well. And that's what actually this is coated in right now, this gray paint. And this stuff sands down really well. And you'll notice, like, if you see it decently enough, there's a sheen to it. That paint actually kind of like buffs into like a really like flat feel, which is nice. So I used tools that I was a bit more comfortable with to get to a final stage versus other people spend more time refining.
Let me see that thing.
Yeah. No, you can't see it.
I'm doing it right now. Okay, yeah, I mean, you can definitely see, for those of you at home not watching on the stream, there's definitely a ball. And it looks like, if I had to reverse engineer this, it looks like you took like chunks of clay and put it over the ball and then kind of carved out layers of flame. Yeah, which is just like little waves, right?
I kind of like mocked out each like little wave streak off the ball. So I would take it and I would flatten it out and I'd mess with it. And then I'd kind of just layer it on there and just kind of move it along how I wanted to. Yeah. And then I would just take some of the clay sculpting tools and refine down some of the edges a little bit. Okay. When
you see this on the blog, you guys will get it. You'll know what he's talking about. It looks obvious.
I swear it'll make sense. It'll actually make a lot more sense when it's in a final form, because this is going to be clear resin when it's done, and there's going to be lights in it.
That's a hell of a tip on the end, man.
Yeah.
When the fire comes to a peak at the top there.
Because it's supposed to be kind of like, it's like a spell where like the fire is like curling up. Yeah. And you
got a couple finger holds here too.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, or maybe on purpose.
I actually kind of planned that.
Yeah.
It kind of actually like conforms with the hand a little bit, which is nice.
Yeah. And it looks good. I mean, you can kind of sit it off in the distance, and even though it's primer gray, essentially flat gray, it has some motion to it. So I think you did pretty good.
Thank you.
Well, your check cleared, so I had to say that.
I'm gonna tell you guys the first time I really kind of, when I did the junk mold and casting, it looked terrible. I was like, I don't know what's happening here. But I also,
were you just super disappointed?
Oh yeah, it looked terrible to me.
Because that's what I would do again, as usual. I would get super mad and like, what? It's terrible. I'm never gonna do this.
And scrap the whole thing. Yeah. There was also other issues when I did the first junk mold.
Okay.
And so we'll segue into talking a little bit about the molding process for you guys. So I use Smooth-On, which I don't have the molding tools here for what I used for the molding process. I have the casting version stuff in here. This is Smooth-On's Umu 30. This sets pretty rapidly.
What is it? What is Smooth-On Umu 30?
So Smooth-On, this is mold making. It's like silicone, essentially, and it's kind of like a rubber silicone.
Right, it's pretty dense and
it's very
hard,
dense.
Right? Yeah.
And it's also very flexible too.
Okay.
I loved working with this because it was thick enough that it conformed around the edges, but also it was kind of like liquidy enough that it got into the crevices pretty decently.
Okay. Is that a problem when you take off your silicone mold, that you have some residual that you don't want around your prop, right? You want it to be hard enough to where it comes off?
All of it.
Is that what you mean?
When everything dried, it was completely intact. There was no like any kind of like little bits of
what I mean.
Silicone that were left.
Yeah, you don't want that. You want to be.
But that also
aware.
Comes from using this.
Okay.
This is kind of basically a nice little spray that you spray onto your prop.
What is it?
So the ease release is kind of like a really light coat that attaches to whatever you're molding.
Okay.
And ends up kind of like when the smooth on dries, it just releases from it really easy.
Okay.
Versus like sticking to it.
Yeah, it's like Pam. Like
essentially
spray on.
like Pam.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
I love. Let me see that can. This is like the worst label I've ever seen. it's like I don't know for those of you old enough to remember generic food, like generic beer,
cheese in a can,
red bread, and you know what I mean. Where it's just like one. This is like two colors. It's yellow with black.
Yellow and black,
and
and
it's
just a lot of words.
It's so basic and like very terrible marketing. But hey, I guess they don't need it.
And for the record, I got all of this stuff from Blick Art Store, which Blick is everywhere here in Northern California and I think Southern California. I don't know if it's in other states as well. If you guys have Blick anywhere, we have it here. It's helpful. This is all crap that you can get on Amazon. Amazon has I just use actually the trial kits to do these. I didn't buy like the full like tubs of them.
Oh, they have little sample whatevers.
Yeah, and
they call them trial kits.
Yeah, the trial kit was like $25.
Oh, okay.
And I thought it would be enough for this. It turns out it wasn't. And I'll actually talk a little bit about that here in a second.
So I have two questions here, and they're kind of in different directions. So
go for it.
With the Umu Smooth or whatever it's called, thank you.
Yeah.
You have it. Where do you pour it into? Because it looks like it has a container that it would fit in.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna go through the whole process. Of creating this mold. And again, this will for you guys. Another photo that'll be on the blog post. You have to create a cage essentially that you're pouring into, because obviously you can't pour a liquid and expect it to stay into a solid surface. And you'll notice this is actually staggered right now. I shaved a lot of it off when I was done. What I started out with was a basic styrofoam board cube. I tagged the fireball onto the base of the board, glued it on, right?
Okay.
So it wouldn't move around. And then I took the styrofoam boards and I created a little box, essentially that surrounded the fireball.
Okay.
Enough that so you'll see the distance around the edges from the junk mold on like where essentially how much space I gave it. Mm-hmm. I may have gave it a little bit of an egregious amount of space.
Yeah, it looks like the top you kind of...
Well, but the top, like... That'll explain that too, because that's where I failed.
Yeah, give me one of those chunks so I can flop around with it. Thank you.
So
damn, that's heavy.
It is heavy.
Just half of it.
Well, because
in the dense part, right? Like not even where the object was, but at the top where you kind of went overboard about 5 inches.
Well, the top, but the problem was
you could beat a man unconscious with this, dude.
It narrows down so much, so it was kind of.
No, I get it, but here, let me see if I can knock you out with this.
Pretty much. So I created this board cutout, and the big thing that you guys have to remember when doing this is sealing the base of this so there's no leak. Because it's still a liquid, so obviously a liquid's going to try and find any gap that it can to escape.
Path of least resistance, my friend.
And in this case, I used hot glue. Just around the whole base of it.
Okay.
Hot glue along the edges all the way up. And just had a solid box, and then I just straight poured it in.
Smooth Umu.
The smooth Umu, the smooth on Umu 30 into it, and just kind of at first I kind of sloshed it around, so I made sure it got under the base of the objects. And once it got under the base of the objects, I just poured the rest in there. Now you'll see from as Jason's holding this, we'll take photos of this as well. There's a lot of really ugly detail in there of like edges that were not smoothed out. They had like cuts in them here and there, spots that had gaps in them, and it took all of that detail into the mold.
Right.
So its ability to capture detail was shockingly well, and in my case. Not helpful at all because it was such a crappy sculpt for me that it captured all of those defects.
Right.
But when you've got a very detailed thing, that's good. And there's a lot of stuff you'll see as you're looking at it. There's a lot of pieces like hanging off And those were all like gap areas or stuff that had like undercuts to it, essentially. Which was all fixed in the final sculpt.
Okay.
So I did the trial kit. I just did one trial kit, and I poured into my box. That's where you see that cutoff line in this. That's how much my trial kit gave me, and I was nowhere near the top of the box.
Right.
So I ended up having to get a second trial kit, but I actually ended up cutting in a smaller box into it. So there was like, here's like the shape of the initial box, and then here was the shape of like the second box. And I was worried that it wasn't actually going to conform to it, but it did. Like the original base was completely dry. And then I poured the second one like 2 days later.
So that tier, right, for those of you
was a whole
at
nother
home,
pour.
right? It looks like a upside down T or whatever, but yeah, because there's a whole nother pour. Okay, well, yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. It would totally solidify and merge with the other one. Yeah,
which I was really thankful that it did. So if you ever end up kind of having to get more of it, it's helpful.
Okay. So, and then to my other question, which you alluded to, when you had your object, right?
Yeah.
That you sculpted, and then you sprayed on the generic
ease release
ease
200.
Release. Okay, so you spray
200.
it on the object, then you put it in the box, and then you pour your silicone mousse over it.
Pour it down.
Okay.
And it just conformed all to the edges.
Got it. Sorry if I need to like belabor that because I wasn't entirely sure at what point of the process or whatever. So okay, got it. Okay, so we've poured it and we've dried it.
We poured it. It's dried. We did the second tier of the pour because I didn't have enough to begin with, which was scary at first, but it ended up working out. At which point I had the full piece. Let me have the other half of it.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Life is so hard for Jason. So at that point I had this giant ugly block and a pour spout, which is where I glued it onto the base. So you've got this big ugly hole in the base of the sculpt, and this is actually where I would theoretically pour the resin in, which we'll get to here in a second. In this case, from this point of creating the mold for me, I cut the whole thing open. I was like, you know what? I want to see how awful this turned out, so I'm going to cut the whole thing open.
Okay.
What
would you normally do?
Well,
to get your object out of the middle.
There's different ways to do it. Some people only cut part way and they peel back this enough to where they can pull the object out. In this case, because it was a clay sculpt that I was working off from here, it didn't work as well as I thought it would have.
Okay.
But it'll work when I create the final mold, because the final mold will be a solid object, like a singular solid object.
Do you need to do that? Is it better if you don't cut the mold all the way? Because in case we haven't mentioned, so what you're going to do is you're creating a negative mold, right? A negative of the object. Yeah. And then you have the mold, the two sides that you cut, you put together, and then you pour your resin into that to make the object, right? So is it bad to do what you did? Well, or it's just more work?
If you end up doing a two-part mold, when I researched mold making, most of what I learned was from Bill Doran at Punish Props. Credit to where I gained some of my knowledge. The rest of this was experimentation. Two-part molds, which this is a two-part mold, because there's
two parts. Yeah. Would it have been? This is probably dumb. Would it have been a two-part mold had you done it the right way and not cut it all open? Not the right way, but you know what I mean.
Like maybe if I had planned to do a two-part mold, you actually end up having to lay the object flat and creating a border around it, and then essentially creating a mold for one side and then creating a mold for the other side once it's dry. But you have to have positive, negative tabs on these so that it lines up perfectly.
Got it.
In this case, I got kind of lucky when I sliced everything open, because I knew I was only going to cast once from here, and I just needed a basic shape of.
Okay. Cool.
So this particular, I wouldn't recommend doing this exactly this way for like a kind of like a weird object like this. But once you get the final cast, I actually had this glued together, or not glued together, like taped together, and I only needed to peel back this much to pull the ball out.
Yeah.
Because it's shaped essentially. Like once you get this
tapers.
widest part out,
Yeah.
the rest of it slides out because of the East 200. So when I create the final mold, I'll only cut probably about a third of the way down. So there's just enough for me to pull that out.
I wonder why 200? Why not just E's? Like, were there 199 other iterations?
There's like an E6000. There's
there
like
really?
E6000 is a glue.
Wow.
E everything. I don't know. Is it? I don't name things. I'm not the namer.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, please.
So this junk mold, as I call it, or as everyone calls it, because it's what it's always referred to as a junk mold, will never have a final result.
Because you're going to throw it away.
I've kept this around for teaching purposes and to instruct myself on how to never do things ever again, because it was, there was just a lot of mistakes to it in general.
Right.
But I was able to get a cast from it, and I don't have that cast because this was actually what this was built off of.
Okay, so what did you do? So you cut it open, you pulled the ball out. We got that.
Cut it open, pulled
Put
the
it
ball.
back together. Did you
put it back together and then
seal it somehow?
I taped everything together.
Okay.
So it held it all in place, made sure it was all lined up perfectly.
Okay.
And it usually snaps back into place pretty decently. It won't anymore because I've thrown it around so many times. It snapped back into place pretty easily the first time I did it. But even just a little bit of fidgeting around like that, and it's back into where it's usually is.
Okay.
And then I used Smooth-On's Cast 300, which is basically a 2-part resin. Couple of things to note when you use the resin casts. One, some of them cure very fast. In this case, this has a cure time of like 10 to 15 minutes. So you've got to get that into your mold quick. Now, second thing to note is it gets hot, like really hot. As it cures, it just gets really hot.
Oh, okay. That's weird.
So just note that.
Like how hot are we talking about?
I don't know if it's enough to burn you, but I could barely pick up the mold.
Oh, that's how warm. Wow, it was transmitting a lot of energy.
All of the energy that comes off of it kicks heat pretty quick.
Okay.
So
it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, be wary of that. But the more detail you have, the more careful you have to get when it comes to using resin casting, because you want it to get into every crevice. So some people will do what's called slush casting, and they'll pour a little bit in there, and they'll kind of just move it around, get it into the details of everything, and then they'll pour the rest of it in and fill the rest of the mold in to get their cast.
Yeah.
I wasn't as worried about that, again, because this was a junk cast.
Okay.
And I knew I was going to be doing a lot of refining to it from that point. So use the Smooth-On in that case. Like I said, the final one will be clear resin, and you can find clear resin through a lot of different resources. Smooth-On has clear resin as well. So pulled the mold apart, and I was left with a very lame version of this.
Why was it lame? What was wrong with it?
Everything. It had gaps in it. There were undercuts, so there was spaces kind of like in between some of the flames that I didn't want. I had to fill those in. And like I said, for the most part, I used my Part A, Part B epoxy. We've linked that a couple of times. We talked about it before. We'll link it again in the blog post. It's basically just a putty that you mix very thoroughly together and just kind of like smooth it over. And then once it dries, you can sand it down really easily.
Okay.
And I did that to fill in the gaps, fill in the flaws, fill in the defects, and then used a coat of 2-in-1 primer to get everything down. It fills in very tiny bubbles and tiny scratches and just kind of like coats it over and then conforms around it, and then just went down and sanded stuff down. And same normal step down process. 240 grit to, usually 300 grit to 240 grit, then to like 100 grit. That's backwards. My bad.
Right.
Start with 100 grit.
Less is more.
Start with 100 grit, then to 220, then to 320, and then I ended up finalizing it with a 800 grit, which is basically no grit, and it kind of just buffs everything together with the 2-in-1 primer. This whole process took me a few days messing around with it, but it got me my final fireball, and then from there we'll be able to do the final mold and final cast.
Okay.
So generally speaking, for anyone wanting to make a prop, something basic, or even if you want to go for a mask or a face or whatever you're aiming at, it's a good route to go. If you don't have access to a 3D printer, if you don't, or like you don't have the 3D model itself, you want to make things on your own end, molding and casting is actually really not as bad as you would think it would be.
That's your professional opinion?
That is my my semi but not really professional opinion.
It has always kind of intimidated me. Not that I have a lot of things I want to mold and cast, but it does seem like a lot of work, or a lot of labor involved.
Yeah, and surprisingly, it's not.
Right.
The biggest things you have to watch out for when you're mixing the part A and part B of the mold materials and the casting materials, it has to be perfect. Get measuring cups, make sure they are equal parts A and B, or for some things it's 2-to-1 ratio. Whatever the ratio is, make sure you have it dead on perfect. That's really important. Another thing in general, make sure you have a big enough workspace that you can move around, but you can do things quickly. Because sometimes you have to get them done very rapidly. But building the box took me 5-10 minutes to place everything in. Pouring everything took me another 10-15 minutes. Mixing it, you've got to mix it very, very thoroughly before you pour it. Between those two steps of things, that was a half an hour of work, and then it dries overnight. I think its actual cure time is like 6 to 8 hours. But from there, the most time I spent on it was making the sculpt in general, because I don't know how to sculpt, and then refining the junk cast.
Yeah.
So not nearly as bad as you would expect.
That's you know what, and it seems pretty. I don't know. You have things that are hands-on like that, especially in this day and age when we have a lot of technology to do stuff for us, like 3D printing.
Yeah.
It seems like it can be pretty rewarding as well to do that.
And there's something always to be said about old school method.
Yeah.
Like traditional sculpting. It's why I enjoy leatherworking so much. It's the old world method of it. It's fun.
Says the guy who's live streaming on Instagram.
I know, right?
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But also, you could, you could sell these things like on Etsy or something like that too. Well, and that's kind
of the plan, because I want to have a shop open up by the end of the year.
You need more projects. I know that about you.
What?
You need more projects.
Oh, I always need.
You need more projects.
I always need more projects.
Right.
That's a lie. I don't.
Yeah.
I probably have more projects going on at one point in my life than I think like anyone I know, because I've got like house renovations going on. I've got costumes coming out everywhere, conventions. It's always chaos. So and then
one day we should
just, let's make a shop too.
One day we should just try to psychoanalyze you and why that is.
Oh God.
I think it'd be fun. That'd be a good time. Well, Anthony, thanks for being the guinea pig of your own creation. And
for you guys out there, we'll have the information when I'm going to stream doing the final mold and the final cast. Are you
going to do it on our channel or your channel?
I'll probably do it on our channel.
Good.
So we're going to actually live go through this process when it comes to the final mold.
Okay.
We'll be a little bit more careful with that one.
Yeah, and we'll be better about telling everybody when that happens.
Yeah,
as well.
We'll give you guys plenty of plenty of notice when it comes down to it. That'll be streaming in a different place than we are currently. I'll be streaming it from my house because my house is way cooler. It's way cooler.
Let's not get into that, Anthony.
That's why you're leaving this house?
Yeah. In a couple months, we'll break down the studio. We're moving about 20 minutes away, and we'll have a little larger room. If you're watching right now, we got the curtain closed because it's super bright outside, but we're going to have a much better studio. I'm really looking forward to better lighting in the studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got some can lighting. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I'm currently setting up everything in my garage, which is interesting. I'm still trying to get it to work.
Yeah.
So I have a bit more workspace. I'm actually just currently streaming out of my office, which is a little compact.
Yeah.
because there's a lot of stuff in my office.
Right.
So it's a learning experience for both of us. But we will be streaming both the molding and the casting of this, so you guys can see the final product. And actually, I'll probably end up streaming the wiring up the LEDs for it too and everything. So
cool. Sounds good, Anthony.
Yeah.
Well, again, man, thanks a lot for doing that and taking us through the steps of the intro to molding and casting.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to get people on to talk about doing more complex stuff too, like kind of an advanced tutorial.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. But anyway, thanks a lot for listening, everybody. This has been the Builders of Cosplay. Of course, you can check out our YouTube page for copies of this video, or they'll probably stay on Twitch. I don't know. I'm still learning all this crap.
There's a backlog of Twitch. You can still watch things.
Who knows? I don't know. Whatever. But anyway, we'll have pictures and stuff on the blog. So until next time, everyone, be good to each other, and we'll see you later.